groups, we come back and we will share a little bit, as much as or as little as you want. And I just want to say a few words about, why we decided to have the meditation before each of the classes. And of course, it's to quiet our minds. It's to open our hearts. It's to differentiate this moment of study and practice from the rest of our day. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but Rabbi Lou would meditate with the Torah in front of him, I'm sure listening for any messages. And rabbis did use meditation before they went into daven. So it's a very Jewish practice. And of course, it's going to help us access what's inside and help us do our personal inventory for this time of tshuva. So Adam is going to keep time. And I think everyone has arrived who is going to arrive. And we're going to have 10 minutes. Hello again. I'll welcome everyone again because we started the meditation. I don't think everybody was on board. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jeffrey Katz, who is Zooming in from Canada. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi, everyone.
And why was Jeffrey invited to speak tonight? As he will be quick to tell you, he is not a rabbi. He is not a professional Jew, but he is a beautiful soul who came to Makor Or to study with Rabbi Lou over 20 years ago. And he was in the community with us for a very long time until he relocated back to Canada about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, right? And what really, the main reason why I wanted to invite Jeffrey was because in his wanderings in the wilderness in Canada, he took Rabbi Lou with him in the form of his books. And every year at the Jewish holiday, he would study Rabbi Lou. And I just felt that, and he's also been very active and interested in wanting to help to archive Rabbi Lou's talks and things like that. So with no further ado, I'm going to give us Jeffrey. We're going to be talking about Rosh Hashanah, which to me was a very magical reading in the book. I loved it. I think there's going to be hopefully a lot for us to talk about in our groups. So Jeffrey, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Joan. And hello, everyone. And it's great to be back here, virtually at least, to see many familiar faces and people I've never met. So thanks for joining for tonight. And it really is an honor to be speaking. Just to add to what Joan was saying, I'll tell you a little bit about how I actually met Rabbi Lou. Some of you may know the story, some of you may not. So by way of introduction, in 1999, I was living and working in Vancouver, British Columbia. By the way, is the sound okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, okay. So I was in Vancouver, and I was a member of Or Shalom, the renewal congregation up there. And Or Shalom had invited Rabbi Lou to give a meditation workshop. So at that time, I was not meditating. As a matter of fact, I did everything I could not to attend, but then, all right, well, I'll attend for a few hours. And so I ended up attending for the last half day of the workshop. And when I got there I was sitting right next to Rabbi Lou on his left side. At the end of the workshop, Rabbi Lou talked a little bit about the program he was starting, which became Makor Or. And he says, come to San Francisco. So little did I know. Soon after that, I went to a job interview in Seattle. Didn't get the job, but while I was there, I went to a job fair, a tech job fair, and I was immediately offered a job in San Francisco. So then I had a job in San Francisco and a teacher in San Francisco. So my next steps were pretty clear. A month later, there I was in Mill Valley, working from a motel with 3 guys that I'd met once in a job a job fair, and a rabbi I'd met once at a meditation workshop in Vancouver. Okay, that was in January of 2000. Okay, now let's move on to why we're here tonight, which is to talk about This Is Real, and You Are Completely Unprepared. So for a lot of people, it's a difficult book to read. Many of us have read it, but for many of us it's new, and it's difficult, even frustrating, because Rabbi Lou paints beautiful canvases, but we're always looking for, okay, well, what's the essential part of each chapter, or what are the 5 to 10 lines I need to underline? But for some people, it's hard to put your finger on it. Now, I think that Rabbi Lou's style of writing in this book actually reflects the material that we're dealing with, because a person's life doesn't boil down to 10 underlined lines, but rather appears as a series of significant, well-remembered episodes. And so too, I think, is the form of each chapter of this book and the book as a whole. So that's a sort of literary critique of the book by way of introduction. So what we're actually going to do tonight is talk about the chapter on Rosh Hashanah, which is on page 113, if you have the book. Okay, so there are a few themes in this chapter, which we'll talk about. And perhaps you've read that chapter and you have ideas about what those themes are. So you can think about those for a minute. If you want, David, maybe I can see the chat, if you want to add in the chat. Okay, but I'll just go on for the sake of time. So the themes are emptiness or nothingness at the center of our being, self-acceptance and self-forgiveness, the idea that the truth of our life is known, the overall process of all of this, which is tshuva, personal transformation. And as usual, Rabbi Lou gives practical pointers towards spiritual practice. So let's take those one by one. I should say that all the quotes that I give are from this chapter in the book. Okay, so on emptiness, Rabbi Lou says, there is a dynamic emptiness at the center of our being that mirrors the dynamic emptiness out of which life arose, page 118. However, most of us we're not paying attention to that emptiness. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Lou says, we see the void and it terrifies us. It looks like utter negation. So we try to set up something in life that affirms our existence. Okay, affirming our existence doesn't sound bad at all, right? It sounds completely laudable. But I think what Rabbi Lou is telling us is that at the same time, we're also obscuring that emptiness that we might acutely feel and obscuring the fact that we might feel something about it at all. He says, I'm paraphrasing, against death, we offer up success, the acquisition of objects, the pursuit of pleasure, the ceaseless rage of activity. But Rabbi Lou says, there's a cost to this. He says, in the process, we give up our nefesh, the nothingness out of which life arises, the emptiness that gives our life meaning. And we give it up because we're frightened of it. Okay, so here it is. We set up our life, we have our relationships, our family, our work, our community. But at the same time, says Rabbi Lou, we're trying to blanket out this emptiness and the feeling of emptiness. And I think that however hard we try to run or hide or numb out that emptiness and the feeling of emptiness, in my experience, maybe the next day after trying to numb that out, you wake up with a hangover, or you wake up sleeping, or maybe you used to wake up sleeping next to someone that you don't even know their name, or you wake up still in your work clothes with your head on your keyboard, and there's your life in front of you, just as it was now, as it was the day before. Rabbi Lou says, in spite of our constant effort, there is failure and death all around us. And it's on the downtown streets and in the testimony of our own bodies. Now, at a certain point, you're maybe exhausted from trying to run or hide or numb out these feelings. At a certain point, there might be a life event that you didn't plan for, and it's just too big to handle. Then what? Rabbi Lou says, if we stop resisting it, the emptiness, for a moment, it is precisely this return to the emptiness that can save us. It is precisely this return that can renew us, return us to heaven. So for many of us, the question is, okay, how do we find our way back to heaven? How do we relocate that spaciousness out of which we emerged? How do we connect with our nefesh, which again is the emptiness at the center of our being that gives life meaning? Okay, holding on to these questions for a moment, I want to take a slight diversion. Rabbi Lou often taught us that you teach based on your experience. He was very well studied. He knew, for example, Genesis extremely well. But if you look at his books, they're replete with stories of his personal life, his interactions with his family, in the community, Besholem, even with the people of Makor Or. In the next book, Be Still and Get Going, he emphasizes this even more. He talks about the story, he tells a story of the Bobo Roshi. So Roshi, as you may know, is a spiritual master in Zen tradition, and Bobo is, I mean, I don't speak Japanese, but apparently Bobo is a jocular expression for the F word. And as Rabbi Lu recounts this, the Bobo Roshi was a monk for 20 years in a monastery in Kyoto. And while all his buddies around him were having satori, spiritual enlightenment, he was stuck. It wasn't happening for him. So he says, okay, that's it. I'm out of here. And he picks up a couple of things, goes out. First person he meets is a prostitute. She sizes up the situation and says, okay, come back with me. He says, okay. And, you know, at the moment of his, like, he has sex for the first time. And at the moment of his climax, according to Rabbi Lu, he has satori, enlightenment. And then, you know, he teaches, the Bobo Roshi teaches from that place. The woman, the prostitute, becomes his first student. And all his students, according to Rabbi Lu, are beggars, homeless, prostitutes, thieves, brigands. Again, says Rabbi Lu, you teach from your experience. Okay, so I will tell you at this point a little bit about my experience of emptiness. My own experience of coming face to face with that, as Rabbi Lu puts it, the dynamic emptiness at the center of one's being. So bear with me as I tell you the story, because what we're doing here is we're recounting the journey of the soul. This is not a vendetta. And the idea is that I'm just giving you enough practical detail, enough practical reality detail to give the context of what this experience was. So, okay, so here it is. I was in a relationship with a woman. I did not choose that relationship. I acknowledge I was carrying personal baggage. That's why I came to practice in Makor Or. So no means no, but for her, no meant press harder. And at a moment of emotional vulnerability, I caved. For the next 2 years, I helped her move on with challenges in her life, but I didn't move. And when she was ready to move on with the relationship, I was still back there 2 years ago when I collapsed. She ended the relationship and then seduced her way back in a month and a half later. There followed 3 or more months of a very challenging time for me, humiliating and confusing, many personal attacks, and the last of which was being tricked into getting into her car and driving to a precipice overlooking Mount Tam, where I was in the passenger seat, and on the one side was if I opened the car door, a 30-foot drop, and then the other side was a blistering personal attack at the deepest place of my nefesh. So as you may imagine, this was a difficult experience for me. And after this, I was literally in a state of terror. I think this is called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. For a year or more, when I looked towards the center of my being, a place which had been the source of my creativity, security, and strength, there was then a shambles of confusion, fear, and grief. I was plunged into an emptiness. I was plunged into a formless, dynamic nothing at the center of my being. Remember, what we're talking about is the journey of the soul here. So for a year or more after that, it took me 3 hours to get to bed and 3 hours to get out of bed. You know, I would sit on my sofa and I'd look at the clock and I'd look at it and the hour hand somehow moved 3 hours, even though I just looked at it a moment ago, and so on. Of course, my ex's experience of all these things might be completely different than mine. I want to say that it was my compassion for her situation which kept me in the relationship to begin with, and compassion which kept me from basically acting out when everything really ended. Okay, so thanks for listening to that story. Again, the point of this is to talk about the journey of the soul with just enough practical detail to give some context to this. The point of me giving this insight into my personal experience is to say that, yes, in fact, the experience of the emptiness at the center of one's being is frightening, as Rabbi Lu suggests. In my case, the experience of emptiness was associated with this emotional attack. But I think, you know, for everybody, each person, it's not necessarily that way. Ultimately, emptiness doesn't go away for having visited there. And in my experience, this many years later, you develop a relationship with emptiness at the center of your being. So how do we go on from an experience of emptiness at the center of your being? Well, in my case, I was able to move on partly by leaving the Bay Area, as Joan mentioned a few minutes ago, and by moving to Saskatchewan in Canada and throwing myself into my work. Partly by regular exercise, but also partly by maintaining my regular spiritual practice. In Saskatchewan, in the city where I lived, it's a small Jewish community, and I had the chance to chant almost every single Haftorah in the cycle of Shabbat weekly readings. I mean, who gets to do that, right? And then also, at least to begin with, I didn't know anyone, so I would study, again, as Joan said, Rabbi Lou's book, Be Still and Get Going. And I asked myself, well, when did Rabbi Lou talk, at what point did he talk about this, or when did he quote that passage from the Torah? So I began to put together an index, and it turned into an index so that the book could be used as a manual of spiritual practice, which is what he had in mind for that book. And again, I also kept up my meditation practice, although often I couldn't do it more than 5 minutes at a time, because to sit was to face the emptiness at the center of one's being. Sometimes a little terrifying. Okay, let's talk a little bit about regular spiritual practice. A story that Rabbi Lou often told is Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who, as you remember, is the traditional, recognized as the compiler of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was once walking with 3 students, and he posed this question. The question was, what is the most important passage in the Torah? So what's the most important passage in the Torah? Okay, so some of you are probably thinking, oh, well, it's the Shema, right? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I am God, your God. You shall have no other, and you shall love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might, and so on. So Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, oh, yeah, very good. And some of you are also probably thinking, no, it's the Eser Dibrot, the 10 sayings, also known as the 10 Commandments, right? Anochi Hashem Elokeinu asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, mm-hmm. And then he turns to the third person, the third student, and he says, Nu. And I don't know if they said Nu in those days, but maybe they did. And the student says, well, for me, it is V'amarta lahem zeh ha'isheh asher takrivu ladoshem kvasim b'nei shana t'mimim shnaim layom olat tamid. It's from Numbers, Bamidbar. Translated, it's, and you shall say to them, this is the fire offering that you are to bring to God. First your lambs, unblemished, 2 every day, a continual elevation offering. And Rabbi Yehuda said, yeah, that's it. So Rabbi Lou comments on this that, it's great, Rabbi Lou comments, this points to the importance of regular spiritual practice. The Olah, the elevation offering, was offered every day. So it's great to go to a retreat where you can spend several days studying important Jewish texts, or go to a meditation retreat for 3 to 5 days, but it's regular practice that strengthens your ability to open the flow of life, to be able to live with awareness. So now let's come back to Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, says Rabbi Lou, the gates between heaven and earth are opened, and things that were beyond us suddenly become possible. The deepest questions of our heart begin to find answers. Our deepest fear, the gaping emptiness up ahead of us and back behind us, suddenly become our ally. Heaven begins to help us. But how does that work? In earlier chapters of the book, Rabbi Lou talks about prayer, meditation, and focusing on one thing. He talks about introspection, the cheshbon nefesh, the summing up of the soul that we're additionally required to do during Elul. And on Rosh Hashanah, as you may know, the synagogue liturgy swings from the normal reference of God as God, Hashem Elokeinu, to God as King, Hashem HaMelech. And the reference to God as King is always there in the liturgy. It's just that on the high holidays, this aspect of God is emphasized. So you can think of this as a metaphor for how, as Rabbi Lu said, heaven begins to help us. I think that Rabbi Lu expects that we will have been doing our spiritual work all year round. And remember that for Rabbi Lu, the high holiday period begins at Tisha B'Av and ends at Shmini Atzeret on the other side of Sukkot. And so I think that also for Rabbi Lu, he expects that in addition to the regular practice, we'll be doing this special emphasis for this period. And then at Rosh Hashanah, says Rabbi Lu, the relentlessness of the high holidays, the long days in the synagogue, the constant repetition of the prayers, the fasting, wears down our defenses and helps us open to the truth of our lives. Let's talk a minute about what Rabbi Lu means when he says, open to the truth of our lives. Since Tisha B'Av, when we more or less allowed the construct of our souls to crumble, we have been letting ourselves see bit by bit the truth of our lives as it is in the context of our regular and Elul practice. Your life might be awesome. You know, you have your dream job, your kids are doing great, you have like a blissful retirement. On the other hand, says Rabbi Lu, when you go to work or when you go to shop, you might consciously pass and ignore the homeless and the working poor who struggle in the same work ecosystem that gives you your great job. Or you might be consciously or unconsciously withholding yourself emotionally from your children. Or because you feel so desperately busy, you feel there's no time to exercise and your body gets stiffer and crankier. Or maybe you've lost like really close friends and family in COVID-19, the coronavirus. Or maybe we're trying not to pay attention to the growing anti-Semitism today from both the political right and the political left. Or indigenous people are far enough away that we don't have to pay attention. We don't see how they live, and so on. So at Rosh Hashanah, Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance, the day of memory, the day of mindfulness, Yom Harat Olam, the day of the creation of the universe, you know, like ready or not, here we come square to face our lives as they are, fully as they are. And if we're engaged in the spiritual practice that we're talking about, that Rabbi Lu talks about, once a year you come smack in front of the truth of your life. And as Rabbi Lu says, owning up to it doesn't make it worse. And not being open about it doesn't make it go away. And we can stand the truth. Okay, then what? Rabbi Lu writes, inner healing requires self-acceptance. He says, what would happen if every time we did something we disapprove of, we opened our heart to heaven? What would happen if every time we felt an impulse, meaning in ourselves, we didn't like, we acknowledged its divine origin? What would happen if instead of running away from these perceived weaknesses, you took ownership of them? What if you allowed yourself to inhabit them completely? And Rabbi Lu answers his own questions. Like everything else in the world, these things will finally have their moment, and after that, fall away. And you won't have to act on them anymore. In other words, you won't have the impulse or desire to act on them. Further, says Rabbi Lu, the aspect of the high holidays that is most helpful in this regard is their holiness. The sense of the sacred, he says, is attenuated in the modern world, to say the least. Still, these are and have never stopped being the high holy days, the days of awe, the days that convey a quality of holiness that we can all feel, even if only dimly. It is precisely this holiness that helps us accept ourselves and forgive ourselves. In other words, the days of Rosh Hashanah create a context in which we can look at the most challenging aspects of our life so that we can accept our life as it is, rather than as we hoped it would be or pretend that it is, so that we can forgive ourselves from what we feel is our own most egregious behavior. Rabbi Lu says, the days of Rosh Hashanah create a context of holiness, and if we pay close attention, we begin to notice that everything in our life is suffused with holiness, even those so-called faults we thought we had to forgive ourselves for. Even that behavior we took to be wrongful, we now realize has a holy spark at its center waiting to be released. This is the essence of self-forgiveness, says Rabbi Liu. So now, in this, the year of COVID-19, the coronavirus, I think we really do need to pay a little closer attention. You know, for a lot of people, the high holidays is a once a year, 3-hour visit to the synagogue, right, during services. So let's not diminish that. On the one hand, this could be paying lip service to the tradition, but on the other hand, this could be an important annual touchstone. Or maybe it's both at the same time. So, but I think that even this once a year, 3-hour visit to the synagogue services, we may not have that, even that this year. And so this year we have the opportunity to take responsibility even more for our own spiritual life and our personal transformation. But we don't have to do this on our own. We have groups such as the one we're gathered here tonight to help us realize that we do continue as a community, even though we may not be actually physically present with each other during the Yamim Noraim, during the high holidays coming up. So let's sum up. I've tried to bring out for you what Rabbi Liu teaches us about the experience of emptiness, of opening to the truth of our lives, of self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, and the overall process of personal transformation. And I've tried to bring out what Rabbi Liu proposes as an annual and all year round spiritual practice, and especially at this time of year. To conclude, what does Rabbi Liu mean when he says, this is real and you're completely unprepared? He means, I think, it's the high holidays, it's the Yamim Noraim, and it's an opportunity for personal transformation. A person might say, I really do want to transform my life, but I don't know how to do this. It's like beyond me. So Rabbi Liu points to acknowledging the truth of our life, to self-acceptance, to self-forgiveness, to a regular spiritual practice that is augmented during these days, and on the days of Rosh Hashanah themselves, to paying attention, even if just a bit, that the days themselves convey a quality of holiness, which helps us through a personal transformation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Jeffrey, you were going to kind of leave everyone with a seed of something to think about during the sharing period. And I remember when we spoke earlier this week, it was along the lines of what in your life happened that you were or are completely unprepared for, and what was your journey? Is that correct?
Yes, what was an experience for you that is real or was real, and for which you are completely unprepared. As I mentioned, this could be something which developed in your life slowly, or it could be a sudden cataclysmic event, or something else. So those are ideas for your discussion in the small groups.
Thank you. Okay, I think David's going to break us out, yeah?
Yep.
Thanks, David. So I guess we'll wait for a moment for Joan to come back. Joan and Adam, are you there?
We're here, and I think the breakout groups are all being disbanded. So I think everyone should be coming back soon. Maybe we should give it a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's get back. Let's start because 31 people are here. Okay.
Do you want to take it, Joan, or should I?
Yeah, Jeffrey, go ahead for it. We can kind of co-lead this part, but that's great. Great.
Okay. So I hope you had good discussions in your groups. Again, when we sent you off, we asked you to look at something which was real, either present or past in your life, and for which you were completely unprepared. So is there someone who'd like to bring forward from their group some of the really, some of the discussion that you had in your group? And I'd like to say that we'll have we'd like to have several discussions. So we'll hear from some people, and then after about 4 or 5 minutes, we'll switch to another person. So if we haven't already switched, so that we can hear, from many people. So again, is there someone who'd like to jump in and talk about something that was discussed in their group?
I'm going to jump in, but it's
Okay.
not going to be with something specific that anyone in my group talked about. We all had our scary, dramatic moments. All of us had something in our lives that traumatized us. But what I got from, we were 7 in our group,
Yeah.
after listening to everybody speak, was that just the possibility of transformation is so encouraging. Whether, it's kind of like, I remember once saying to Rabbi Lou in a private session, because when we were meditating, when we were his students, one of the things we got to do was have one-on-one private sessions with Norman and with Rabbi Lou. And I said, this enlightenment thing, it feels so far away, it's this huge mountain. He's kind of like, nobody gets there. Kind of like, don't worry about it. You're not the only one who's not getting to the top, or feeling resolved, or that your issues are resolved. And one thing that we talked about in our group is that maybe one year we get, 2 seconds of transformation, and the next year 3 seconds of transformation, but that it adds up over time, and that it is once we've had these life-changing events, it takes time. And of course, Jeffrey, you addressed that a lot about being kind to ourselves and allowing that. So I just wanted to say that just holding out the idea of transformation seems to be a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Joan. Someone else? So David, I have to say, I'm depending on you a little bit in case there's someone who's sort of showing that they want to say something, and I don't know if I can I unmute people?
You can.
Okay. Okay. Well, again, if you want to say something, just send a chat message or something, and I'll try to unmute you. But something which came up in our group is that not all life-changing experiences are negative. Some are very positive. And not all life-changing experiences happen and then, that's it. And then, life goes back to normal. Some life-changing experiences happen and then your life is completely changed. And we talked about, for example, you might lose a parent, but on the other hand, you might have children. And I don't have children, but that's life-changing and very real. And as I understand it, something for which you're unexpected, you're not prepared. So, so maybe people want to talk about some of these other. So, okay, so when we took that the next step farther, we said, okay, well, how does this then become, a practice where it's not just, okay, that happened, but how is this a sort of practice during the year, and especially at this time of year?
I'm just going to say something that we talked about in our group. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi,
Good to
Susan.
see you, and thank you for your teaching.
Yeah.
That going through those really hard times when we're thrust into these moments, from my practice, I've been more prepared for the moment, but there's still no being prepared for it. And how it's those hard moments that really taxed me, where I needed support and where I got support, and getting through to the other side. I feel like it's like my soul grows a little more. My soul gets stronger a little more. And through continued practice, I'm able to be more present in those really hard moments. And no matter how much I think I'm prepared, I'm not prepared. But I will say, by meditation practice and prayer practice and keeping mindful in those situations, I am a little more prepared in that I can be present. But how it works out and what comes next is, I don't have a lot of control over. So.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Susan. Someone else? Sally? They're all in the chair. Sally?
This isn't what I shared in our group, but as I listened to Susan and reflected back on what Jeffrey was saying, in the early 1990s, I got flooded with memories of sexual violence as a child, and I was completely unprepared. I had no idea that that kind of stuff existed in my family and had happened to me. And I was lucky enough to have a therapist, at least 15 years before that, who introduced me to meditation. And as Susan was saying, that having a practice that's now over 40 years old, and when that happened to me in my 40s, of the memories, it did help me occasionally to stay present to the awfulness. And the practice of sitting and watching whatever shows up in your practice as you're sitting on your cushion, that when it comes up in the other parts of your life, that you practice as a verb. You're practicing being present and watching without judgment. And when the judgment shows up, dropping the judgment and coming back to what's happening. And it was actually having a practice that made it possible for me to stay present, which is how you get to the other side, as Susan was saying. So, and it's one of the reasons I was drawn to Beth Sholem and I met Rabbi Lou when I was still living in Boston. My best friend was out here, and I'd come to visit her, and she dragged me over to the shul. I mean, because we get what we do on this screen and in Makor Or and in our individual practices, it's something that's not happening in a lot of places to have each other and to have access to what we're doing. So thank you to all for that.
Yep. Thanks.
We have about 3 more minutes before we're going to do I'll prepare you for the next meeting, and we'll have a 1 or 2 minute meditation. But definitely time for another person to jump in if you want.
I'm jumping in.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Jeffrey, thank you for such a wonderful teaching tonight.
Thank you,
And
Beth.
I was just thinking about what a friend said to me yesterday. She said that even if I don't know that if I don't feel God with me, or a higher power, spiritual person, thing, whatever you believe in, if I don't think that God is there, God is there. And I have to in my practice, I have to pretend that I know all the time, because I always struggle in this time of year, and I get really into my spirituality at this time, and I sit for 30 days in Elul, and I really contemplate myself, and I get really close to God. And then the day after, I think, I said this in my group, can I keep this going? Can I feel this way all the time? And then I forget, and then I feel like I'm lost and I'm afraid and all these other things. And I just want to be able to, maybe the day after the holiday is over, I'm just going to pretend that God is here. So anyway, so thank you, everyone.
That's lovely.
Thanks, Beth.
I just wanted to ask Cheryl if I can. Yeah, I just wanted to know, you were probably a little bit part of this book. I can imagine that you read it with Rabbi Lou and you helped edit a little bit of the book and all of that. So how do you feel about what we're reading about the book and you living with him and experiencing all of this so close to you?
Mute myself? Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. My real feeling is that we don't need the book this year. Everything is too much, is very real, and we're all waking up to it. When you wake up and there's darkness all day, when there's smoke and you can't go out, and you wonder what's going to happen to your grandson, what kind of a world he'll grow up in, and whether you'll ever fly east to see your friends, and why my friend Jerome had to die in this, and if the militia's coming to take over after the election, and all this. I think if he were here, maybe he would be doing what I'm doing, which is like a daily practice. Mine is not prayer, but it's painting and taking care of my friends and my grandson and family. So, but the reality of this is unbelievable. This is a huge shift, and it could be very, very, it's very easy to see this as the end of the world in many ways. But I also choose to see it as the beginning of a revolution in consciousness and a time to make things better. And I know that my life has gotten better in some ways, just being home and doing things purposefully. At first I thought, of course, I'll clean out the attic. Well, that didn't last long. Didn't last long. So, I'm singing and painting and studying and taking and observing my grandson. And so I am one of the privileged people right now. I have a friend in the hospital, and I am very grateful. And it's to not know what's happening is going to happen means that I just happen to believe in young people, creative people, to recreate a better world. Our world kind of stunk in many ways. And all the little actions Alan did in social justice made this ping a little dent. But now it's time for this is a time for a revolution in consciousness. And I don't know how we're going to save California, how we're going to come out of this smoke. So that's what I have to say. But hello, everyone, and so glad to see everyone. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, Cheryl. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Well, before we have about a 2-minute meditation, I just want to say a few things about this evening. First, as with all the other meetings, I'm so moved and touched by everyone's feelings and sharing and openness. It's, to me, it's such a beautiful thing. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Susan Stanger, whose birthday it is today.
Happy birthday.
Which is why she's wearing her Hawaiian crown.
Oh, that's
And happy birthday, Susan. And also one of the reasons why I it's someone else's birthday too.
My birthday too. Yesterday.
Today?
No, yesterday.
Yesterday. Oh, happy birthday, Carol. And you know, one of the reasons when we put this together, you know, Adam and I looked at all of the people who loved Rabbi Lou and share his teachings. But one of the things that was important to us and that we talked to Rabbi Ain and Rabbi Russell about was that what a beautiful moment here to be able to bring to the community people who were Rabbi Lou's students who've become serious teachers. Like Danya, and now next week, Marilyn Heiss is, not next week, September 23rd, which we're going to change from Sunday to Wednesday. Marilyn Heiss is going to talk about Yom Kippur, and she was a Rabbi Lou student. And it's just, we didn't want to have all just the rabbis who had adopted his teachings, because we were a community and we want to keep that community alive and that feeling of community alive. And so that was how this all came to pass. And if you set the clock for a minute or two.
Yeah, we'll do 3.
Okay. We're just going to close. Maybe this will give you a minute to, as we say, digest what we've talked about. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Happy birthday to all the birthdays. Yay! And come back on September 23rd, 7 o'clock, and have a lovely Rosh Hashanah on Friday and Saturday, and I don't know if we'll see people on the gallery, but we'll be Zooming in. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Bye, Jeffrey.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.